an original story narrated exclusively for Love Written in Silence. The morning light caught on Lady Clara Fenwick's pearl hairpin as she walked the garden path, her hand resting with comfortable familiarity on Lord Edmund's arm. Duke Alden Wexford froze mid-stride, his fingers tightening around his walking stick until his knuckles whitened beneath his leather gloves. Clara's eyes met his across the gravel path, her chin lifting slightly, not in defiance, but with a quiet dignity that pierced him more deeply than any accusation. The Duke's jaw clenched as Edmund leaned closer to whisper something that brought a gentle smile to her lips, a smile Alden had never managed to inspire despite years of careful, proper attention. Something unfamiliar and molten stirred behind his ribs, a feeling so foreign to his disciplined nature that he nearly staggered under its weight. The late April sun cast long shadows across Kensington Gardens as Duke Alden Wexford maintained his measured pace along the gravel path. He had always found solace in these morning constitutionals, the orderly arrangement of hedges and flower beds mirroring the careful structure of his own life. At 42, he had built an existence defined by propriety and respect, his reputation for moral rectitude as solid as the ancestral stones of Hawthorne Hall. The Duke paused at the sound of familiar laughter drifting from the adjacent path. He recognized it immediately. Lady Clara Fenwick. The widow's presence in London had been noted in his social circle, though he had maintained a respectful distance since her husband's passing 2 years prior. Curiosity drew him forward until the path curved, revealing the source of that gentle sound. Lady Clara walked with her hand resting on the arm of Lord Edmund Harlow, Alden's oldest friend and confidant. The sight struck him with unexpected force. Clara's fingers curled naturally around Edmund's sleeve, her body angled toward him with an ease that spoke of comfortable intimacy. Her chestnut hair was arranged simply beneath her bonnet, her morning grays replaced by a dress of soft lavender. When she glanced up and caught sight of the Duke, she did not start or pull away from Edmund. Instead, her expression shifted subtly, a momentary assessment followed by a calm acknowledgement. The morning light illuminated her face, revealing not the fragile widow of society's imagination, but a woman of quiet strength. "Your Grace," she greeted him with a proper curtsy that somehow managed to convey both respect and independence. "Lady Fenwick, Lord Harlow." The Duke bowed, his voice maintaining its customary evenness, despite the unfamiliar sensation spreading through his chest, something sharp and possessive that he had no right to feel. "Splendid morning for a walk," Edmund said cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the sudden tension. "Lady Fenwick has been telling me about her work with the parish orphanage." "Indeed," Alden replied, his gaze drawn to where Clara's hand still rested on Edmund's arm, a gesture so simple yet so profound in its implication of trust. The conversation that followed was brief and proper, but Alden found himself unable to focus on the words exchanged. Instead, he observed the easy manner in which Edmund leaned slightly toward Clara when she spoke, the way her eyes brightened when discussing the children in her care. As they parted ways, the Duke watched them continue down the path, noting how Edmund's hand briefly covered Clara's in a gesture of reassurance. Only when they disappeared from view did Alden recognize the emotion that had seized him. Jealousy, raw and undignified. The realization brought with it another, more troubling truth. In the 2 years since her widowhood, he had offered Lady Clara nothing but distant courtesy, while Edmund had clearly provided friendship and support. The Duke turned toward home, his steps no longer measured but hurried, as if he could outpace the uncomfortable awareness that now accompanied him. He had failed in ways he had never before considered. Lady Clara Fenwick had constructed her widowhood with the same careful attention she had once applied to her watercolors, each stroke deliberate, the overall composition balanced. At 38, she had settled into a life that, while not filled with passion, offered purpose and dignity. The modest townhouse in Bloomsbury provided sufficient distance from society's constant scrutiny, while maintaining her connection to those circles where her charitable work required influence. Her late husband, Sir James Fenwick, had left her comfortably situated, though not wealthy. The marriage had been one of mutual respect rather than grand romance, a fact that made grief manageable, but also left an unacknowledged hollow space where deeper connection might have flourished. Clara's weekly routine, included oversight of the parish orphanage, carefully selected social engagements, and correspondence with a small circle of trusted friends. Society approved of her dignified widowhood, her charitable endeavors, and her quiet withdrawal from the marriage market, at an age deemed appropriate for such retirement. What society did not see, what Clara herself rarely acknowledged, was the private relief that accompanied her independence. The freedom to arrange her days according to her own judgment, rather than another's expectations, had become precious to her. Duke Alden Wexford occupied a different stratum of society entirely. His ancestral seat at Hawthorne Hall represented 8 generations of careful stewardship and increasing prosperity. His holdings extended through 3 counties. His influence reached Parliament, and his reputation for moral rectitude was unimpeachable. At 42, the Duke had never married, though not for lack of opportunity. Matchmaking mamas had presented their daughters for his consideration for nearly 2 decades, yet he had maintained his independence with unwavering courtesy. Society had eventually accepted his bachelorhood as an eccentricity permitted to one of his station. What few understood was that the Duke's hesitation stemmed not from indifference to marriage, but from an exacting standard of propriety that rendered most potential matches insufficient. He believed in marriage as a serious commitment requiring perfect compatibility of values, station, and temperament. The connection between Lady Clara and the Duke stretched back 15 years to her early marriage. They had moved in the same circles, exchanged pleasantries at the same events, and maintained a cordial acquaintance marked by mutual respect, but little genuine intimacy. When Sir James died, the Duke had sent an appropriate letter of condolence and made a substantial anonymous donation to the orphanage where Clara volunteered. He had then maintained a careful distance, believing it the proper course for a single gentleman toward a newly widowed lady of good reputation. The morning encounter in Kensington Gardens had disrupted this carefully maintained equilibrium. As the Duke returned to his London residence, the image of Clara's hand resting on Edmund's arm continued to intrude upon his thoughts with uncomfortable persistence. "A letter arrived from Lord Harlow, Your Grace," his secretary informed him as he entered his study. The Duke opened the missive with uncharacteristic haste. "My dear Alden," Edmund had written in his familiar scrawl, "I've taken the liberty of inviting Lady Fenwick to the Millington musical soiree tomorrow evening. Her knowledge of Bach is surprisingly extensive, and I thought you might enjoy her perspective on the program. She has become a valued friend during these past months, and I believe you would find her conversation most enlightening." The Duke set the letter down, his fingers lingering on the page. Edmund's casual reference to these past months suggested a friendship that had developed during precisely the period when Alden had maintained his proper distance. As he dressed for dinner at his club, the Duke found himself considering Lady Clara with new attention. He recalled her as she had been before her marriage, a young woman with observant eyes and a subtle wit that emerged in rare, unguarded moments. He remembered occasional conversations at various gatherings over the years, her comments always thoughtful, if carefully measured. What he could not recall was ever seeing her laugh with the unrestrained pleasure he had witnessed that morning with Edmund. "Will you be attending the Millington soiree tomorrow, Your Grace?" Lord Blackwood inquired over brandy at the club later that evening. "I had not planned to do so," the Duke replied, "but I find my schedule may permit it after all." The following evening, as he entered the Millington drawing room, his gaze immediately sought and found Lady Clara. She stood near the pianoforte, engaged in conversation with Edmund and several others. Her dress of deep blue silk was modest yet becoming, her only ornament a simple strand of pearls. When she glanced up and saw him, something flickered briefly in her expression, surprise, perhaps, or wariness, before she offered a polite smile and curtsy as he approached. "Your Grace," she greeted him. "Lord Harlow mentioned you might attend this evening." "I find Bach's compositions particularly worth the effort," he replied, noting how she stood slightly apart from the group, maintaining a careful distance that he suddenly recognized as a mirror of his own habitual reserve. As the music began and conversation ceased, the Duke found himself watching not the performers, but Lady Clara's profile, wondering what thoughts moved behind her composed expression. and why, after 15 years of proper acquaintance, he felt as though he was seeing her for the first time. Lord Edmund Harlow had been the Duke's friend since their days at Oxford, where Alden was measured and deliberate. Edmund was warm and spontaneous, qualities that had initially made their friendship unlikely, but ultimately complementary. Edmund's diplomatic career had taken him abroad for extended periods, but he maintained his London connections with characteristic enthusiasm. During his returns to England, his friendship with Lady Clara had begun innocently enough at a literary society meeting 6 months after Sir James's death. Clara had been discussing George Eliot's latest work when Edmund joined the conversation, offering insights from his diplomatic travels that complemented her observations. Lady Fenwick possesses that rare quality of listening before forming judgment, Edmund explained to the Duke as they rode through Hyde Park the morning after the musical soiree. Most people merely await their turn to speak. The Duke considered this assessment, recalling Clara's attentive manner during the previous evening's performance. You have become quite familiar with her character in a relatively brief acquaintance. Edmund glanced at his friend with sudden understanding. I see what troubles you. You observed us in the gardens and drew conclusions. He chuckled. Clara, Lady Fenwick, was feeling unsteady. The path aggravated an old ankle injury from her youth. I merely offered support. You need not explain your friendships to me, the Duke replied stiffly. Perhaps not, but I would spare you unnecessary concern. Lady Fenwick values me as a friend precisely because I make no demands upon her. After her husband's passing, she found herself surrounded by people with expectations, relatives suggesting appropriate behavior, gentlemen testing her receptiveness to attention. I simply offered conversation without agenda. The Duke absorbed this information in silence, recognizing the implicit criticism. While Edmund had offered Clara genuine friendship, Alden had maintained a distance justified by propriety, but perhaps motivated equally by avoidance of emotional complexity. She mentioned you, you know, Edmund added casually. Indeed? The Duke could not prevent the note of interest that entered his voice. She wondered why you had never called during her period of mourning, when you had been so regularly present at gatherings before Sir James's death. She thought perhaps she had somehow given offense. The Duke's hands tightened on the reins. Propriety dictated restraint. A single gentleman calling upon a widow might invite speculation. Edmund's expression remained carefully neutral. Of course, though many found ways to express condolences without compromising appearances. That afternoon, alone in his study, the Duke confronted an uncomfortable truth. His avoidance of Clara had been less about propriety and more about his own discomfort with grief and emotional vulnerability. The realization sat poorly with his self-image as a man of principle. The next morning brought another encounter, this one unplanned. The Duke was leaving his solicitor's office when he nearly collided with Lady Clara on the pavement. Your Grace, she said, recovering quickly from her surprise. Forgive me. I was distracted by thoughts of the orphanage accounts. No apology necessary, Lady Fenwick. I was equally inattentive. He hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic impulsiveness. May I inquire if the accounts present difficulties? A flicker of surprise crossed her features. Nothing insurmountable. Merely the usual challenge of stretching limited resources to meet unlimited needs. Perhaps I might be of assistance, he offered. I have some experience with financial matters. She studied him with those observant eyes that seemed to see more than he intended to reveal. That is kind, Your Grace, but I would not impose upon your time. It would be no imposition, he assured her, surprised by his own eagerness to be of service. Then I would welcome your insight, she conceded with a slight smile. Though I warn you, orphanage finances are considerably less grand than ducal estates. Yet no less important, he replied, earning a look of genuine appreciation that affected him more than he cared to admit. As they parted ways, the Duke found himself contemplating an idea that had begun to form during their brief exchange. If he truly wished to understand Lady Clara Fenwick, to correct his misapprehensions, and perhaps address his neglect, he would need more than occasional London encounters. What he needed was time, extended, uninterrupted time, in a setting where social constraints might relax enough to permit genuine conversation. And as master of Hawthorne Hall, There was one particular arrangement within his power to create. By evening, the Duke had made his decision. He would host a small house party at Hawthorne Hall, with Lady Clara and Lord Edmund among the carefully selected guests. The invitation would be framed as an opportunity to discuss potential patronage for the orphanage, a pretext that offered propriety. While creating the circumstances, he now found himself increasingly eager to arrange. The invitation arrived on cream vellum, embossed with the Wexford crest. Clara turned it over in her hands, noting the Duke's precise handwriting on the accompanying note. Lady Fenwick, I would be honored if you would consider joining a small gathering at Hawthorne Hall next week to discuss potential patronage arrangements for your orphanage work. Several interested parties will be present, including Lord Harlow, who speaks highly of your administrative capabilities. The gathering will extend from Wednesday through Sunday, allowing ample time for both discussion and country recreation. A carriage will be provided, should you accept. Your servant, Wexford. Clara placed the invitation on her writing desk, her thoughts turning analytical. The Duke of Wexford had maintained such careful distance for 2 years that his sudden interest in her charitable work struck her as peculiar. Their encounter outside the solicitor's office had been brief, but notably different from their previous interactions. There had been an earnestness to his manner that she had not witnessed before. What do you make of this, Martha? She asked her companion, passing her the invitation. Martha Winters, who had been Clara's lady's maid before becoming her paid companion after Sir James's death, adjusted her spectacles. His Grace is known for his philanthropic interests. Perhaps Lord Harlow mentioned your work. Perhaps, Clara agreed, though something in her doubted this explanation. The timing seemed too convenient after their garden encounter. After careful consideration, Clara composed her acceptance. If the Duke genuinely wished to support the orphanage, she could not refuse such an opportunity, regardless of her personal reservations. The journey to Hawthorne Hall took most of a day. The Duke's carriage was comfortable, and Clara used the time to review her notes on the orphanage's most pressing needs. By late afternoon, the carriage turned onto a long drive lined with ancient oaks, revealing glimpses of the hall through the branches, a grand Palladian structure of honey-colored stone that seemed to capture the late spring sunlight. A small welcoming party awaited on the steps. The Duke himself, Lord Edmund, Lady Millicent Carstairs, Mr. Henry Blackwell, and the Reverend and Mrs. Thomas. Lady Fenwick, welcome to Hawthorne Hall, the Duke greeted her, his formal bow impeccable as always. Your Grace, thank you for your kind invitation, Clara replied, noting how his gaze lingered on her face a moment longer than strict propriety required. Lord Edmund stepped forward with his characteristic warmth. Clara, the journey wasn't too taxing, I hope. Not at all, Edmund. Your letters prepared me well for the beauty of the approach, she replied, accepting his offered arm with the easy familiarity of established friendship. She did not miss the slight tightening around the Duke's eyes at this exchange, confirming her suspicion that this gathering might have motivations beyond philanthropy. Mrs. Winters was shown to the adjoining room to Clara's spacious chamber, where a maid helped them refresh themselves before dinner. The room overlooked formal gardens that transitioned into more natural woodlands beyond, a view that Clara found herself appreciating as she changed into an evening gown of sage green silk. The Duke has placed you in the East Wing's best guest chamber, Mrs. Winters observed, the one traditionally reserved for visitors of particular importance. Clara met her companion's knowing look in the mirror. Let's not read too much into household arrangements, Martha. As you wish, my lady. Though I've worked in enough great houses to recognize when special attention is being paid. Dinner. That evening was served in the smaller of Hawthorne Hall's 2 dining rooms, still an impressive space with silk-covered walls and family portraits dating back centuries. Clara found herself seated between Lord Edmund and Mr. Blackwell, with the Duke presiding at the head of the table. The conversation flowed easily among the small group, focusing initially on general topics: the unusually fine weather, London exhibitions, recent publications of note. Clara participated appropriately while observing the Duke's management of the gathering. He directed conversation with subtle skill, ensuring each guest's particular interests received attention. Only after the first course did he turn the discussion toward philanthropy, beginning with Lady Millicent's patronage of a hospital in York. "And you, Lady Fenwick," the Duke said, his gaze finding hers across the table. "Lord Harlow tells me your approach to the orphanage administration has been quite innovative." "I would not claim innovation, Your Grace, merely practical adaptation to limited resources," Clara replied. "Children's needs remain constant regardless of financial constraints. Modesty becomes you, but Edmund assures me your methods deserve wider implementation," the Duke persisted. Clara felt a curious tension in the exchange. Beneath his words lay something unspoken, an attention that seemed to extend beyond her charitable work to herself as a woman. It was a quality she had never before detected in their interactions. As the evening progressed, she became increasingly aware of the Duke's observation. When she spoke, he listened with complete focus. When Edmund leaned close to share an aside, the Duke's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. By the time they retired to the drawing room for coffee, Clara had reached a conclusion. Whatever his stated purpose for this gathering, Duke Alden Wexford had invited her to Hawthorne Hall for reasons far more personal than patronage discussions. The realization left her both wary, and despite her better judgment, intrigued. The second evening at Hawthorne Hall brought a more formal dinner party, with additional guests from neighboring estates. Clara entered the grand dining room in a gown of deep burgundy, the most elegant in her modest wardrobe. The Duke, resplendent in evening attire, greeted each arrival with perfect courtesy, though Clotis's gaze returned to her repeatedly throughout the pre-dinner gathering. The seating arrangement placed her farther from the Duke this evening, between Reverend Thomas and Sir William Blackwood, a neighboring landowner. The distance provided Clara an opportunity to observe her host without the intensity of direct interaction. The Duke presided over his table with effortless authority, his manners impeccable, his attention to each guest's comfort meticulous. Yet Clara detected a certain tension in his posture whenever Lord Edmund, seated near Lady Millicent, leaned toward her with his characteristic animation. "I understand you've known His Grace for many years, Lady Fenwick," Sir William remarked as the first course was served. "We have moved in similar circles since my marriage," Clara confirmed, "though our acquaintance has always been formal rather than familiar. The Duke sets great store by propriety," Sir William nodded, a quality increasingly rare in these modern times. The conversation shifted to local matters, but Clara's attention was drawn to an exchange between Lord Edmund and Lady Millicent that had captured the Duke's focus. "Oh, but surely you visited Lady Fenwick during her bereavement," Lady Millicent was saying. "Such a difficult time for a woman alone." Edmund's response carried clearly in a momentary lull in table conversation. "I was in Vienna when Sir James passed, but I called immediately upon my return to England. The Duke, of course, was in London throughout that period, but felt it improper to call personally." Clara's hands stilled over her soup. This casual revelation that the Duke's absence had been a deliberate choice rather than circumstance confirmed what she had long suspected, but never known with certainty. "His Grace sent a very proper letter," she said, her voice steady despite the sudden hollowness she felt, "and made a generous anonymous donation to the orphanage, which I later discovered came from his personal accounts." The Duke's gaze met hers across the table, and in that brief connection, Clara recognized something unexpected, not embarrassment at being discovered, but regret. "I believe His Grace considers financial support more practical than personal attention in most circumstances," she added, her tone neutral, though her words carried subtle weight. "A practical approach indeed," Lady Millicent agreed, unaware of the undercurrents. "Though sometimes a widow needs conversation more than currency." The Duke cleared his throat. "I have often found that good intentions executed imperfectly are the common lot of mankind, Lady Millicent. We each offer what we believe most useful, though we may sometimes misjudge what is truly needed." The admission, oblique as it was, surprised Clara. In 15 years, she had never heard the Duke acknowledge even the possibility of error in his judgment. As the dinner progressed through multiple courses, Clara found herself reconsidering the man at the head of the table. She had always viewed the Duke of Wexford as a figure of unwavering certainty, a man so confident in his understanding of propriety That flexibility seemed impossible. Yet his words suggested a capacity for self-reflection she had not credited him with possessing. When the ladies withdrew to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen to their port, Clara found herself by a window overlooking the moonlit gardens. Lady Millicent joined her, wine-glass in hand. "I hope I did not cause discomfort with my comments about widowhood," the older woman said quietly. "I sometimes speak too freely." "Not at all," Clara assured her. "Truth rarely causes lasting damage, however momentarily uncomfortable." Lady Millicent studied her with shrewd eyes. "You know, my dear, I've known Alden Wexford since he was a serious young man of 20. He has always been guided by principles, rather than impulses, a quality that makes him reliable, but sometimes distant, a common characteristic among men of his station," Clara observed neutrally. "Perhaps. But I've noticed something different in him these past 2 days, a certain attentiveness I've not seen before." Lady Millicent sipped her wine. "Particularly when his gaze follows you." Clara felt a flush rise to her cheeks. "I believe His Grace is simply focused on our discussions of the orphanage patronage." "If you say so, my dear." Lady Millicent's smile was knowing. "Though in my experience, men rarely arrange elaborate house parties for purely philanthropic purposes." When the gentlemen rejoined them, the Duke made his way directly to where Clara stood. For the first time since her arrival, they found themselves in conversation without others immediately present. "I hope the evening has been to your satisfaction, Lady Fenwick," he said, his deep voice pitched for her ears alone. "The hospitality of Hawthorne Hall is beyond reproach, Your Grace," she replied. A brief silence fell between them before he spoke again, his tone different, less formal, more hesitant. "I find myself wishing to clarify Lord Edmund's earlier comment. My absence during your bereavement was not due to indifference." Clara met his gaze directly. "Yet it was a choice." "One I have come to question," he admitted, the words seeming to cost him something in pride. Before she could respond, Reverend Thomas approached to discuss the Sunday service, and the moment of unusual candor passed. Yet as the evening concluded and the guests began to retire, Clara found herself revisiting the Duke's words. He had made a choice 2 years ago to maintain his distance, justified by propriety, but perhaps motivated by emotional caution. Now something had changed, something that had prompted not only this gathering, but also his unprecedented acknowledgement of potential misjudgment. As she prepared for bed, Clara considered her own position with clear-eyed pragmatism, whatever had prompted the Duke's sudden interest. She would not allow herself to become the object of a possessive impulse born from seeing her with Edmund. If Alden Wexford wished to correct his past absence, he would need to demonstrate more than momentary attention, sparked by jealousy. She had built her widowhood on self-reliance and quiet dignity. Neither was a quality she was prepared to surrender for anything less than genuine understanding and consistent regard. The following morning dawned clear and mild. Clara rose early, donning a walking dress and sturdy boots, for a solitary exploration of the grounds before breakfast. The formal gardens gave way to woodland paths, and she followed one that led toward a small lake visible from her bedroom window. She had nearly reached the water's edge when she heard footsteps behind her. She found the Duke approaching, dressed for riding, but apparently having abandoned his horse to follow her on foot. "Lady Fenwick," he called, "you are an early riser." "The country air invites morning exploration, Your Grace," she replied, waiting as he closed the distance between them. "I hope I haven't strayed where guests are not permitted." "You are welcome anywhere on the estate," he assured her. "Though I would have arranged an escort had I known your intentions. I've grown accustomed to independence," Clara said simply, "and I find solitude conducive to clear thinking." They stood side by side, looking out over the lake where mist still clung to the surface. Birds called from the surrounding trees, and somewhere in the distance, a gamekeeper's whistle sounded. "This was my mother's favorite view," the Duke said unexpectedly. "She would often walk here in the mornings, while my father attended to estate business." The personal recollection surprised Clara. In all their years of acquaintance, the Duke had rarely spoken of his family, except in the most general terms. "It's beautiful," she acknowledged. "Peaceful in a way London never manages to be. Yet you choose to remain in the city," he observed. "My work is there," she replied. and I've found that country isolation can be difficult for a woman alone. He turned to face her directly. Last evening, you suggested I made a choice to maintain distance during your bereavement. It was merely an observation, not an accusation, Clara said carefully. Nevertheless, it was accurate. His gaze remained steady on her face. I believe formality the proper course. I see now that judgment may have been insufficient. The admission clearly cost him something in pride. Clara studied him, noting the unusual uncertainty in his expression. Why this sudden concern with past decisions, Your Grace? She asked directly. What has changed? A faint color touched his cheekbones. I find myself reconsidering many things of late. Since seeing me with Lord Edmund in the gardens, she suggested, watching his reaction carefully. His eyes widened slightly. You are very direct, Lady Fenwick. Widowhood grants certain freedoms, she replied, including freedom from pretense when it serves no purpose. The Duke was silent for a moment, seemingly gathering his thoughts. You are correct that seeing you with Edmund prompted reflection, not from jealousy, as you might suppose. Aren't we beyond such pretense, Your Grace? Clara interrupted gently. He met her gaze, and something shifted in his expression, a surrender of sorts. Very well. Yes, I experienced jealousy, an emotion I found both unfamiliar and unwelcome. But what followed was more significant. The realization that Edmund had offered genuine friendship, while I had offered only distant courtesy. And now you wish to correct that imbalance, Clara concluded. I wish to know you, he said simply. Beyond the formal acquaintance we've maintained all these years. Clara considered his words carefully. Knowledge requires presence, Your Grace, not merely when convenient or comfortable, but consistently, through difficulty and ease alike. Before he could respond, the breakfast bell sounded from the house, its distant ring carrying clearly across the water. We should return, Clara said, turning toward the path. Your other guests will be gathering. The Duke fell into step beside her, closer than propriety strictly required. Will you join the riding party this afternoon? Edmund mentioned you were an accomplished horsewoman in your youth. I haven't ridden properly in years, she admitted, though I did enjoy it once. I have a mare with an excellent temperament, he offered. If you would consider trying again. Clara glanced at him, recognizing the invitation as more than a simple suggestion of recreation. Perhaps, she conceded, though I make no promises regarding my current abilities. His smile, the first genuine one she had seen from him during her stay, transformed his features from handsome to almost boyishly appealing. I find I am developing a new appreciation for honesty without promises, Lady Fenwick. The afternoon ride revealed a different side of both the Duke and his estate. Away from the formality of Hawthorne Hall, he proved a patient guide, selecting a gentle mare for Clara, and leading their small party along well-maintained bridle paths through the estate's extensive woodlands. Edmund rode alongside Lady Millicent, their conversation animated and punctuated by frequent laughter. Clara noticed how the Duke's attention remained primarily on her, rather than on their companions, his concern for her comfort evident in each careful choice of path and pace. You manage the mare beautifully, he observed as they paused in a sunlit clearing. Your skills have not diminished, despite the passage of time. Some abilities remain in the body's memory, Clara replied, stroking the horse's neck. Though I had forgotten the particular pleasure of moving in harmony with such a creature. There are many pleasures we deny ourselves out of habit or caution, the Duke said quietly. I begin to think such denial is not always wisdom. Clara studied him, noting the unusual openness in his expression. A surprising observation from a man renowned for self-discipline, Your Grace. Perhaps even discipline requires occasional reconsideration, he suggested, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that stirred something long dormant within her. As they resumed their ride, Clara found herself contemplating the man beside her with new awareness. The Duke of Wexford was revealing himself to be more complex than she had believed, capable of both jealousy and self-reflection, formality and unexpected warmth. Yet she remained cautious. A few days of attentiveness could not erase years of distance, nor could momentary interest guarantee lasting regard. If the Duke truly wished to know her, he would need to demonstrate not just present attention, but the promise of future constancy. And Clara had learned through bitter experience that such promises once broken, left wounds slow to heal. On Saturday morning, Clara was surprised to receive a note delivered by the Duke's personal secretary. Lady Fenwick, if your schedule permits, I would appreciate your presence in the estate office at 9:30 this morning. There is a matter regarding the orphanage that requires your attention. Wexford. The formal tone of the note contrasted sharply with the Duke's more personal manner during their ride the previous day, curious and slightly concerned. Clara made her way to the estate office at the appointed time. She found the Duke seated behind a massive oak desk, various ledgers and documents spread before him. The morning light through the east-facing windows illuminated his features, revealing lines of concentration and perhaps something more, a tension that suggested inner conflict. Lady Fenwick, thank you for coming, he said, rising as she entered. Please, be seated. Clara took the chair he indicated, noting the presence of Mr. Simmons, whom she recognized as the Duke's solicitor from London, and Reverend Thomas, who offered her a warm smile. I've asked these gentlemen to join us as witnesses, the Duke explained, his manner formal yet underscored by an unusual intensity. What I am about to propose requires proper documentation. Clara's wariness increased. I'm not sure I understand, Your Grace. For some years, the Duke began, I have held the mortgage on a property in Bloomsbury, specifically the building that houses your orphanage. Clara stared at him in surprise. I was under the impression that Lord Blackwell's foundation held that mortgage. Lord Blackwell acts as trustee, but the funds are mine, the Duke clarified. An arrangement that allowed me to provide support without direct association. The revelation unsettled Clara. You've been our anonymous benefactor all this time. Why the secrecy? Initially, to avoid any appearance of impropriety given your recent widowhood, he admitted. Later, perhaps out of habit or misplaced pride. Mr. Simmons cleared his throat. His Grace has instructed me to prepare documents transferring ownership of the property directly to the orphanage trust, with you and Reverend Thomas as trustees. The mortgage will be considered fully satisfied. Clara's breath caught. The value of the property in Bloomsbury was substantial. Such a gift represented not merely generosity, but significant financial sacrifice. This is most unexpected, she managed, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the gesture. There is a condition, the Duke continued, his gaze steady on her face. I ask only that you allow me to continue supporting the orphanage's operational costs through regular donations, no longer anonymous, but openly acknowledged. Reverend Thomas beamed. A most generous arrangement, Your Grace. The children's futures will be secured for generations. Clara remained silent, her mind working to understand the Duke's true motivation. This was no casual philanthropy, but a deliberate and significant relinquishment of both property and advantage. May I speak with His Grace privately? She asked finally. The solicitor and Reverend exchanged glances before withdrawing, leaving Clara alone with the Duke in the morning-lit office. Why? She asked simply once the door had closed. The Duke rose and moved to the window, his back to her for a moment before he turned. Because it is right, he said. The orphanage needs security, and I have the means to provide it. There are many worthy charities that need security, Your Grace, Clara countered. Yet you choose this one, at this particular moment, with these specific arrangements. He met her gaze directly. You wish for complete honesty? I would accept nothing less. The Duke drew a deep breath. When Sir James died, I maintained my distance out of what I believed was proper respect. I told myself that financial support was more appropriate than personal attention. In truth, I was uncomfortable with grief, yours or my own. He moved closer, his voice lowering. Seeing you with Edmund made me realize that my choices were not solely guided by propriety, but by emotional cowardice. He offered friendship when you most needed it. I offered only money from a safe distance. Clara remained silent, allowing him to continue. This transfer of property is not an attempt to purchase your regard, he said firmly. It is a correction of an imbalance, placing the orphanage's future directly in your hands rather than keeping it subject to my control. It is also a demonstration that I am capable of acting beyond self-interest. A grand gesture, Clara observed quietly. Not a gesture at all, he countered. A choice with real consequences, made with full awareness. Clara studied him, noting the unusual vulnerability in his expression. And what do you hope will follow this choice, Your Grace? I hope for nothing beyond what you freely choose to give, he replied. Whether that is mere acquaintance, friendship, or, he paused, then continued with careful precision, or something we might discover together, should you be willing to explore such possibilities. The morning light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, illuminating the man rather than the Duke, a man capable of both error and growth, pride and humility. The documents await your signature, he said when she remained silent. Regardless of your answer to my unspoken question, Clara rose and moved to stand before him. I have learned to be cautious with promises, Your Grace, especially those made in moments of high emotion. As have I, he acknowledged, which is why I offer none, only the opportunity to begin again, with honesty between us. She considered his words, weighing them against her own, carefully constructed independence. I will sign the documents, she said finally. The children's security must come first. As for the rest, time will reveal what may develop between us. Relief and something deeper crossed his features. A wise approach, Lady Fenwick. Clara, she corrected gently. If we are to begin again, perhaps we might use our given names, at least in private. Clara, he repeated, the single word carrying unexpected weight. And I am Alden. They stood in the morning light, the distance between them still present, but somehow altered. No longer a barrier, but a space where possibility might grow. Dawn painted the eastern sky in delicate pinks and golds. As Clara descended the main staircase of Hawthorne Hall, her traveling case, packed for the return to London. The house was quiet, the other guests still abed after the previous evening's final dinner. She paused in the grand entrance hall, taking in the ancestral portraits and elegant furnishings that spoke of centuries of Wexford history. Her week at the hall had altered something fundamental in her understanding, not just of the Duke, but of her own capacity for new beginnings. You're departing early. She turned to find Alden entering from the library corridor, already dressed though the hour was unusually early for him. I thought it best, Claire replied. The orphanage committee meets tomorrow, and I should be present to explain the new arrangements. He nodded, accepting her reasoning without challenge. The carriage is prepared whenever you wish to leave. They stood in the soft morning light, the silence between them comfortable, rather than strained. I've instructed Mr. Simmons to work with Reverend Thomas on establishing the trust, Alden said finally. All legal matters should be resolved within the month. Thank you, Clara said simply. Not merely for the property, but for entrusting its management to those who work most closely with the children. It was never truly mine to control, he acknowledged. Merely a responsibility I held temporarily. Clara recognized the statement for what it was. Not just a comment on property, but a deeper understanding of the nature of possession and care. Will you call when next you're in London? She asked, the question direct but gentle. If you would welcome such visits, he replied. I would. Her smile was genuine if still cautious. Though I make no promises beyond conversation, and perhaps occasional walks. I ask for none, Alden assured her. Only the opportunity to demonstrate consistency, where before I offered distance. They moved together toward the main doors, where a footman waited to escort Clara to the carriage. Outside, the morning mist was lifting from the gardens, revealing the beauty of early summer across the estate. Edmund leaves for Vienna next week, Alden mentioned as they paused on the threshold. He asked me to convey his regards and his intention to write. He is a good friend, Clara said, watching Alden's face carefully. To both of us, I think. Yes, Alden agreed, and she noted with satisfaction that no shadow of jealousy crossed his features. I've come to appreciate that more fully. As they reached the carriage, Alden took her hand, not with possessive intent, but with gentle respect. Safe journey, Clara. Thank you for your hospitality, Alden, she replied, allowing her hand to remain in his a moment longer than strictly necessary. No declarations were exchanged. No promises offered beyond the implicit understanding that had developed between them, a recognition that genuine connection required not grand gestures, but daily choices sustained over time. As the carriage pulled away from Hawthorne Hall, Clara looked back once to see Alden still standing on the gravel drive, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. Something new had begun between them. Not a conclusion, but a beginning, built on honesty rather than assumption, choice rather than obligation, and in that beginning without promises lay the possibility of something far more enduring than either had dared to imagine before their paths crossed in a sunlit garden April morning.